This next lesson of the Richard and John Unit 2 is focusing on the area known as Normandy, which was part of the Angevin king's continental lands. So we're going to look at the importance of Normandy. More importantly, look at how Richard was able to reclaim Normandy in 1199. So, if you're unsure, don't forget, the King of England was also the king of the Angevin Empire. The Angevin Empire was this, if I just draw it on here, the Angevin Empire would have been this area here. Now, if you are the King of France, which is here, you are going to want land to make yourself powerful. And this area here, Normandy, was absolutely vital to strategic strength to be able to help whoever controlled that plot of land. So, today we're going to look at the aims of Richard, John, and Philip. Look at the most important area that was built within Normandy, an area called Chateau Gallard. And then also we need to look at an area that the question on why Richard was able to reclaim Normandy before he died in 1199. This has not come up on the GCSE yet, and this could be a very popular question because Normandy makes up a big chunk of the end of Unit 2. Now, as I've mentioned, this area, okay, you've got the blue part, which is controlled by the King of France, and the rest, which is controlled by the King of the Angevin Empire. The middle here is known as the Norman Vexin, okay? Now, the Norman Vexin was in control by the leader of the Angevin Empire, and having the Norman Vexin puts you in a strategically powerful position. It would have been around here, which means that you could potentially launch an invasion. If you had control of the Norman Vexin, you have a strategically important stranglehold on an area which could put you in a position of strength if you decided to invade. So the first task today is to look at why Normandy was so important to both Richard, John, and Philip, because when Richard died, it's just as important to John because so many people had land in both England and Normandy that if you were to lose control of Normandy, you might lose respect from your people. So I want you to look at these statements and decide if they are an economic reason for importance. So that means that it brings lots of money in. A strategic reason, meaning that it helps with the military, helps with attacking, or a political reason. Political reason means it helps you control better. You need to put E, S, or P in the correct box. And then summarize the importance of Normandy in 5 bullet points. So pause the video here, go through these. If you've not got the sheet, then write down economic, strategic, or political in your book and summarize the statements. So 5 minutes, and then I will go through the answers. So number 1, many English barons controlled land in Normandy as well as England. This is going to be political, because if you upset the barons, they could turn against you and possibly cause issues for your rule. Okay, so politically, to keep the English barons happy, you had to keep Normandy. Normandy was a very wealthy area. The total revenue means the amount of money it brought in, was comparable to what the whole of England brought in. This is economic. Normandy was a very wealthy area that brought just as much money in as the whole of England. There were strong trade links between England and Normandy. That is going to be economic because you can raise money based on the trade links between 2 areas. If someone gained control of Normandy, they could use it as a base to invade England. That's strategic. Remember, Normandy's nearer the coast, so by having control of it, you could launch an invasion into England. Normandy paid a lot of money to help pay Richard's ransom. Well, that shows how economically important it is. Loss of Normandy could result in barons losing confidence in the king's ability to protect his people. That's political because it's questioning the king's ability. Normandy was a 1-day ride to Paris, the country's capital. Now for that, it's going to be a strategic reason. Especially if the King of France controlled Normandy, it's only a 1-day ride to Paris, so that it really wouldn't take too long to get there, which means you can keep control of both areas. Philip II saw Angevin control of Normandy as threatening to French protection. I mean, that's going to be strategic. Philip thought that as long as the King of England had control of Normandy, it puts him and the French population in serious threat. The key area known as the Norman Vexin. This was directly between Normandy and Paris, the centre of powers for both kings, connected by the river Seine. Well, this is going to be strategic, and it also could be quite political because whoever had it is going to have stronger control over the area. So that summarises why Normandy was important. Now, your extension is to summarise the importance of Normandy in 5 bullet points. I'm not going to go through all of those, but it's important that you have 5 reasons why, so that you have a good understanding. If you were to ask, maybe, for example, describe 2 features of Normandy in the period, and then you'd be asked that. So, task 2. What was Normandy like in 1194? Now, you've got to remember that Normandy in 1194, this was when Richard got back from his ransom. So when Richard arrived back, what position was it in? What did he have to do? Now, spoiler, Richard was in a bad position. Okay, 1194, he'd been away for 1 year and 6 weeks. He'd also been away on crusade. He basically allowed this area to be ruled by someone who wasn't him. Worst thing was, though, is that Richard's brother John actually allowed most of this. So, what was the position like in 1194? Philip made serious inroads into Normandy. He controlled most of Normandy to the east of the River Seine, and he had captured important areas such as geysers. Okay, so he made eastern inroads into Normandy and took over important areas. The more areas he took over, the more difficult it was going to be for Richard to gain them back. Philip's army laid within striking distance of Rouen, the capital city. So the capital city of Normandy, which is here, Rouen, Philip was nearly there, striking distance. Some of the most powerful Norman lords had gone to Philip's side. Now, why do you think that? Is that Norman lords really only supported who had the best situation. And because Philip looked like he was about to take over Normandy, they were going to move on to his side. The reason for this is because if Philip was successful, they would have wanted to keep their land. In Aquitaine, barons were in revolt against Richard. Now, Aquitaine, here, Richard also had a rebellion against him from barons in Aquitaine. So Richard's coming back to a pretty difficult time. Philip had a number of powerful allies. Lots of people were on Philip's side who would help attack Richard if Richard were to attack. And more importantly, Philip was in control of the Norman Vexin, that part that I showed you earlier in the lesson, which lay about here. The worst thing was John didn't stop any of this. So we're going to practice our long peel paragraphs. Now remember, you can only do these in the exam if you've got plenty of time. Explain why Richard was in a bad position in 1194. So the point is bad position because Normandy was in a difficult situation. You're going to use these bullet points as evidence and then explain why that puts him in a bad position in 1194. So that's your starter sentence. I'd spend about 5 minutes on this. Remember, in the exam, to do a long peel paragraph, you'll have about 7 minutes, maybe even less, depending on how long you spend on other questions. Pause the video here and then do that peel paragraph, ready to move on to task 3. Now, this is where I think that it could come up in the exam. How did Richard reclaim Normandy? Between the years 1194 and 1199, Richard went through a process of getting Normandy back under his control. It took 5 years to undo everything that had happened while he was away, both on crusade and in prison. Now, there's 4 reasons why Richard was able to reclaim Normandy. And I'm going to put a load of information on the next slide, and you've got to colour code them. The first reason why Richard was able to reclaim Normandy was his military skill, his alliances, Chateau Galard, and Philip's errors. If you've got 2 pieces of evidence for each of these, then you can write the explain question if you've got this in the exam. You might get a how far question, but I think this definitely opens itself up to an explain question more. And remember, in the exam, if you've got an explain question, You wouldn't have to write about all 4 of these. You only have to write about 3 of them. Remember, when you're doing your revision, 3 is the magic number. If you know 3 facts about each person or event, then you're going to be on a winner. So this is the information. What I'm going to do is I'll go through this with you. These are the 4 factors. So military skill we'll call 1, alliances 2, Chateau Galard 3, Philip's errors 4. Before I go through it, I want you to spend 5 minutes now. Just pause the video and see if you can colour code each factor into the evidence. So let's go through it. Now, the key thing with this that you should understand is that it's in chronological order. So each square is in order of the time period, 1194 to 1199. The only 2 that aren't are these 2 here. Okay, that's just information about Chateau Galard, but every square goes in time order. So, in May 1194, Richard arrived in Vernal, an area in which Philip had taken a castle. Richard sent a force of knights and crossbowmen to break French lines. Now, a lot of you might wonder, well, why is that important? So that's Richard's military skill. First of all, Richard needed to take back as many castles as possible because they helped him become stronger. A castle in itself was a very strong, fortified. You needed your castles to keep areas strong, and if you had the control of the local castle, the chances it would be very difficult for someone to overthrow it. The fact that Richard was quick to send a force of knights and crossbowmen to break the French lines is going to damage the French morale, and it's also going to allow Richard to advance further into Normandy. John, Richard's brother, turned on Philip and began to fight on Richard's side in May 1194, and this helped Richard take over. Now, this is alliances. Think about how much John would know about Philip's plans. The fact that John turned on Philip means that Richard's got one less thing to worry about. If John's not turning on Richard, that's brilliant, because then Richard can just then focus on Philip, which is going to be a significant boost for Richard in trying to reobtain Normandy. In July 1194, Richard and Philip were only a few miles apart in the area of Vendôme. Philip tried to intimidate Richard by sending a messenger to Richard's camp saying they were about to attack. Richard waited and responded that if they did not attack by the morning, then Richard would. In the morning, Richard attacked Philip, who retreated and hid in a church. Now, this is Philip being all talk. So number 1, this shows that Richard has strong military skill as he doesn't back down. But it also shows that Philip made a significant error because he didn't actually attack Richard when he was said they were going to. And it ended up Philip running away and hiding in a church. In late July 1194, John faltered and lost a battle to Philip. Most of John's infantry and artillery were captured. Richard and Philip made a truce, which stated no fighting until November 1195. This shows Richard's skill, his military skill. Why? As things were going so wrong, Richard put a pause to it. And by pausing the fighting and calling a truce between that, July 1194 and November 1195, it gives Richard time to regroup. It gives Richard time to reassess the situation. That was a strong move. You could also argue there was an alliance with Philip, but Philip was his enemy. It's military skill because Richard knew the best time to fight, and he realised that he might have been in a weaker position because John basically messed up by losing a battle to Philip in July 1194. In 1196, this is a key turning point. Richard decided to build a strong fortress to protect Normandy and act as a base to attack Philip to recapture the land that had been taken in Normandy. This is military skill, but also this is the beginning of Chateau Galard. By building a fortress to protect Normandy and act as a base, this fortress was massive. Okay, Richard spent more money on this chateau than he did on every castle in England. So it showed how important it was. And by building a base, and we're going to go into the information about this later on, by building a strong base meant he could launch attacks, have reserves, have equipment, And eventually it was going to basically grind away at Philip and his men. In 1196, Richard built Chateau Galard. This castle cost 12,000 and was the strongest castle ever built. Richard had only spent 7,000 on all castles throughout England. Chateau Galard, that one. In October 1196, Richard made an alliance with Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse. This turned a former enemy into an ally who understood the land well. Now, this is alliances, and the key thing I want you to focus on here is that this person understood the land well. It would be able to help Richard be more strategic, more effective, and the fact that he was a former enemy meant that Richard could use the intel, the background knowledge that this person might have on Philip's attacks. In the early summer of 1197, Richard formed an alliance with Baldwin IX. This was important as Baldwin once helped Philip. Baldwin attacked Artois and Arras, and which took Philip's attention away. While Philip tried to stop Baldwin, Richard captured many castles in Berry. So the first thing Baldwin does is he takes Philip's attention away from the game, basically. And while he does this, Richard is able to take advantage. The key thing here is that the more allies that Richard has, the easier it is for him to be able to go forward and recapture the land that he lost in Normandy. And in 1198, Richard gained another ally, Renaud, Count of Boulogne. This weakened Philip. Richard's allies gained more and more land, including Courcelles and Bari. This forced Philip to agree peace terms. So again, the more allies that Richard has, the more land they're going to help recapture. Philip is no longer just fighting Richard. Philip is fighting Richard, he's fighting Baldwin, he's fighting Raymond, he's fighting Renaud, he's fighting numerous people who he's got to defeat. The more people that Richard got on his side, the harder it was for Philip to keep hold of the land that he got. On top of this, Richard also had a pretty impressive chateau to be able to launch attacks. In January 1199, Richard and Philip agreed to a 5-year truce. Philip gave back everywhere he had taken. Richard had reclaimed Normandy. So by January 1199, Richard agreed to a 5-year truce, which meant that Philip couldn't attack Richard. The only problem with this truce is it didn't last very long, because in 1199, Richard died, and with Richard's death, ended the truce. Okay, but in this respect, so we're just going back, we know these last two are allies. In respect here, the 5-year truce, you could say that this, it's a military skill, just because Richard, it was basically, actually with this one, it was actually military skills, alliances, Chateau Galard, and Philip's errors, because without all these 4 things here, Richard would never have reclaimed the areas of Normandy. And then these last 2 are just information about Chateau Galard. And I'm going to go into Chateau Galard in a bit of detail now. So, the most important way for Richard to get Normandy back was to build a castle on the river Seine, overlooking the Norman Vexin, Chateau Galard. The castle took 2 years, and it cost an enormous amount of money. Even though it took 2 years to build, he still had a strategic base that he could use. It was a defensive structure in a royal palace where Richard held court. Its defences were considered to be the strongest in Europe. It was built hundreds of feet above the town and harbour at Les Andelys, which made it difficult to tunnel under the walls. Even more importantly, it had round walls. So catapults were successful in siege where the stone struck angles. Chateau Galard was seemingly impossible to attack because it was high above sea level and it had circular walls, which made it really hard to damage. And because the castle was on a direct route from Rouen, the capital of Normandy, supplies could be transported, and it was also near other key strategic castles, such as the one at Geysers. The castle itself helped Richard reclaim land in Normandy, and it also helped him reclaim the Norman Vexin. The only question I think you could get on this on Chateau Galard separately is a 2 features question. Now, before we end this lesson, we obviously need to look at the death of Richard. So in January 1199, Richard, who was nearly in control of the Norman vexin, and after negotiating, and he negotiated a truce with Philip II. By March 1199, Richard decided to go and check on the defences of his troops, who were besieging a castle in Limoges. The mistake Richard made here is he went without armour, strolling along the line of defence. An archer appeared and shot him with a crossbow. Richard didn't die from the shot, but he actually removed the arrow shaft himself, and he left the bolt in his shoulder. This was going to turn to get very infected. Surgeons ended up removing the bolt, and the wound became very infected. Within a week, by April the 6th, 1199, the infection had spread too far, and Richard died of an infection. So by April the 6th, 1199, we were in a situation where John was now going to look at becoming the King of England.